something about this doesn't sit right. And I'm not talking about one clip, one headline, or one tweet. I'm talking about the sequence of events. Because within days, the internet went from celebrating Jake Paul finally getting humbled to questioning whether the fight was ever real, to suddenly seeing law enforcement footage attached to his name. And once those dots appear on the timeline, fair or unfair, people start connecting them. Fighters started reacting. Analysts went quiet. Comment sections turned feral. And the same question kept coming up over and over again. How did it get here this fast? Tonight, we're breaking down why the boxing world is reacting the way it is, where these claims actually came from, and how a narrative can snowball so aggressively that it feels real before anyone stops to check if it is. Because whether you believe this or not, the damage isn't waiting for confirmation. Up until recently, the conversation around Jake Paul was simple. He lost. He got exposed. End of story. Then something shifted. Clips started circulating. Headlines got more dramatic. Language escalated fast. Suddenly, words like scripted, fixed, and rigged weren't being said quietly. They were being shouted. And that alone would have stayed internet noise, if it weren't for what happened next. Because when law enforcement imagery enters a celebrity narrative, even unrelated, perception changes instantly. Not logically, emotionally. And boxing fans are already emotionally primed to distrust. Here's the uncomfortable truth. This didn't blow up because people hate Jake Paul. It blew up because boxing has a credibility problem, and Jake Paul sits right at the intersection of money, spectacle, and distrust. Fans have been burned before. Bad decisions, weird judging, protected stars, promoters playing chess behind closed doors. So when someone comes along who openly treats boxing like entertainment, fans don't wait for proof. They wait for confirmation of what they already believe. Jake didn't create that mindset, but he became the perfect canvas for it. Let's be honest. If this exact sequence of events happened to a quiet, traditional boxer, this wouldn't have spiraled the same way. Jake Paul's entire brand is built on control, narratives, spectacle, provocation. So when something unexpected happens, like a brutal loss, people don't ask, what went wrong? They ask, what changed? And once that question enters the room, conspiracy has oxygen. This is the part nobody wants to admit. There was a lot of money tied to expectations, betting, streaming projections, sponsorship assumptions, viewership forecasts. When outcomes don't align with what people thought would happen, the brain looks for reasons, not evidence, reasons. And in a sport where money and matchmaking already feel murky, it doesn't take much for people to whisper, fix, especially when they already don't trust the system. Here's where the narrative truly went nuclear. The word arrest entered the conversation, not as a confirmed fact, not as a statement, but as a question. And here's the thing, questions don't feel like questions online. They feel like accusations waiting to be proven. Once that word appears next to someone's name, screenshots travel faster than context, and outrage travels faster than correction. By the time anyone slows down, the story already feels real. Here's where the narrative truly went nuclear. The word arrest entered the conversation, not as a confirmed fact, not as a statement, but as a question. And here's the thing, questions don't feel like questions online. They feel like accusations waiting to be proven. Once that word appears next to someone's name, screenshots travel faster than context, and outrage travels faster than correction. By the time anyone slows down, the story already feels real. This is what matters most. Not what's proven, not what's denied, but how the boxing world reacted. Fighters didn't rush to defend. They didn't rush to accuse either. Instead, the reaction was awkward silence, nervous jokes, and a lot of, "This looks bad for boxing." That tells you something. If there were proof, reactions would be loud and confident. If there were nothing, reactions would be dismissive. This is neither. This is discomfort. And this is where narratives become unstoppable. Because silence gets interpreted as strategy, movement gets interpreted as avoidance, clarification gets interpreted as damage control. Even normal behavior starts looking suspicious once the crowd decides the ending. That's not justice, that's momentum. and momentum doesn't wait for facts. Here's the part people keep missing. This isn't just about Jake Paul. This is about how fast the internet can turn speculation into belief when trust is already broken. Jake is the symbol, boxing is the backdrop, and the audience is already primed to believe the worst. That combination is explosive. Now, and only now, is where things need to be said carefully. Because once you peel back the noise, the picture becomes less cinematic and more uncomfortable. There is a massive gap between what people are saying and what has actually been confirmed. And that gap is where misinformation thrives. But even if nothing legally comes of this, and that is a very real possibility, the perception damage doesn't magically disappear. That's the trap. Here's the dangerous phase of stories like this, and we're already in it. Once a narrative reaches critical mass, people stop asking what happened and start asking who's lying. That's the pivot. Because now, every old clip gets re-examined. Every interview gets replayed with suspicion. Every joke becomes a tell. People aren't consuming information anymore. They're hunting confirmation. And in Jake Paul's case, the internet already has a backlog of moments it didn't like. Loud behavior, provocation, money talk, the heel persona. So when something feels off, people don't need proof. They need alignment. And suddenly the question isn't, is this true? It's, why does this feel true? That's the most dangerous kind of belief. This is bigger than boxing. We're living in an era where audiences are trained to believe that nothing big is accidental, nothing powerful is clean, nothing wealthy is innocent. So when a celebrity fight involves massive money, betting markets, streaming platforms, influencers, people don't see sport, they see incentives. And once incentives enter the picture, conspiracy becomes easier to swallow than coincidence. That doesn't mean it's correct. It means it's emotionally satisfying, because it explains discomfort in a clean, dramatic way. Here's another uncomfortable truth. In the current internet climate, denial doesn't calm people, it agitates them. If Jake Paul says nothing, people say he's hiding. If he says something, people say he's spinning. If officials speak, people say they're protecting money. There is no move that restores trust instantly. Once the crowd believes there's smoke, every attempt to clear the air feels like proof that the fire mattered. That's not justice, that's narrative gravity. This is where Jake Paul's brand comes back to haunt him. For years, he's been praised and criticized for being hyper-strategic, always thinking 3 moves ahead, always turning controversy into clicks. That works when outcomes align with expectations, but when they don't, people assume manipulation failed rather than randomness occurred. It's the curse of being too good at marketing yourself. You train your audience to believe everything is intentional, so they stop believing accidents exist. And now, Jake Paul is dealing with that exact consequence. Behind the scenes, the concern isn't just about Jake. It's about what this does to the sport. Because every time a narrative like this takes hold, boxing looks less legitimate to casual fans. And casual fans are the money. They don't separate influencer boxing, traditional boxing, promotional politics. To them, it's all the same ecosystem. So when conspiracy culture attaches itself to a high-profile event, it bleeds outward. That's why the reaction hasn't been celebratory. It's been cautious. Even if, months from now, nothing comes of this. No charges, no wrongdoing, no follow-up. The stain doesn't wash out completely. It lingers in comments. It resurfaces in memes. It gets weaponized by opponents. That's the brutal part. Public figures don't just survive facts, they survive perception. And perception doesn't need evidence to persist. I'll say this plainly. I don't believe boxing needs scripts to feel fake. It just needs poor trust, money, and timing. And Jake Paul happens to exist where all 3 overlap. That doesn't make him guilty, it makes him vulnerable. And vulnerability is all the internet needs. If you're waiting for a clean ending to this, you're going to be disappointed. Because stories like this don't end, they evolve, they mutate, they resurface, they attach to the next event. The moment Jake Paul fights again, this comes back. The moment odds look weird, this comes back. The moment he wins convincingly, this comes back. Because once doubt is planted, it doesn't die quietly. There's another phase in stories like this that people don't talk about enough, and it's the most uncomfortable one. It's the silence phase. Not the dramatic silence, not the lawyer told me not to speak silence, the awkward silence. The one where updates slow down, where headlines stop escalating, where nothing new technically happens, but nobody feels settled. And that's where we are right now. Because when a story this loud suddenly stops producing answers, the audience doesn't relax. It leans in closer. People start asking, why did the momentum stall? Who benefits from time passing? What's being handled quietly instead of publicly? Again, none of that proves anything. But emotionally, it feels unfinished. And unfinished stories are dangerous online. It's just paused. So let me say this clearly. Right now, we're not watching a case unfold. We're watching trust unravel in real time. We're watching what happens when spectacle collides with suspicion inside a sport that already lives on thin ice when it comes to credibility. A sport where history has trained fans to question everything, and where money, influence, and optics matter just as much as punches. And whether Jake Paul did anything wrong or not is almost secondary at this point. Because his biggest fight right now isn't in a courtroom. It isn't in negotiations, and it definitely isn't in the ring. It's in the minds of millions of people trying to decide whether what they're watching is real or just another performance. And that's a fight nobody wins overnight. Because once doubt enters the room, it doesn't need evidence to survive. It doesn't need confirmation to spread. It just needs attention. It needs people to keep watching, keep dissecting, keep replaying old clips, keep filling in gaps with theories instead of facts. And that's where this story gets dangerous. Because unanswered questions don't fade, they ferment. They grow louder in silence. They come back stronger the next time the spotlight turns on. So that's where we leave this for now. Not with closure, not with certainty, but with tension still hanging in the air. Because this story isn't over. It hasn't ended. It's just been paused. And when it starts moving again, the next chapter is going to be a lot louder than the last.